Hi, this is Mike Fauché, and today I'd like to do a short video on setting up a failover connection on my Sophos router using a 4G LTE modem. Hope you enjoy the video, and if you haven't already subscribed, please do so, and don't forget to click that notifications icon. Okay, so let's get into this particular device, why I bought it, and then we're going to go through the setup. We're going to walk through everything, and then ultimately we're going to attach this to my router and establish a failover connection. So in the event that my cable modem goes out, this will kick in. And the reason this is critically important for me is because my security system, my cameras, my alarm system, everything relies on internet connection. So you know, in the event of any type of an emergency or even just an outage, I want to not lose access to those systems. I don't want my alarm to stop working. My alarm system does have a cellular backup in it, but the service that they use doesn't have any reception at my house. So my intent is to try and use this more or less universal 4G LTE modem. It's a GSM based, and use the T-Mobile service, which is rumored to have reception here, and we're about to find out. Let's actually see what's in this box here. So, quick start guide, the actual modem, and let's see what else we got here. Power supply and network cable. So this is a Netgear. This is kind of a fairly universal 4G LTE modem. The reason this intrigued me a little bit is because the Ethernet port. A lot of them have a Wi-Fi bridge, and I really want to, for a failover condition, I really want to hardwire this in. So I want to be able to take this in to my router and have it serve as a failover. So that's the objective here. So not much else to it. So we're going to get in and get this thing configured and give it a test. Okay, so let's get into a little bit about the device and some of the features, the basic configuration, how it's set up, and then from there we'll actually go into the firewall, set up a failover, and see exactly how that works. So here's the login page. To get to the login page, you just basically open your browser. If you're directly connected, it should probably pop up and take you to this page. If not, you can type in the default address there, which is 192.168.5.1, and it'll come up with this login page. Now, once you sign in, it shows you a little bit about the plan. It shows you a little bit about where you are and how you have it configured. And as you can see, I've used about 1/4 gig, and I actually have a 2 gig plan because all I bought right now was a pay-as-you-go just to test this out. Since I'm not going to be using this other than for emergencies, I want to keep the cost as low as possible. So since I've been doing a lot of testing, I've used up some of the data already, so I'll probably have to refill it faster than I anticipated, but that's okay for this experiment. So this is the front page. Again, it tells you a little bit about what's going on. You can use any of the GSM in this device. You can use any GSM SIM, so you can use T-Mobile, AT&T. So let's go over some of the basic settings. So there's not much else on the dashboard other than setting your billing rate. So let's go into settings. So in the settings here, you can set change your default admin login, which I would recommend you do since it's actually written on the back of the device. And then from there, you have some other minor configurations like turning the LEDs on and off, etc. The default language. Up here, you can see you have software and reset. So under here, you have the option of doing a factory reset, a device restart, a software update, so you can check for software updates, and then to download and save your settings, which is always kind of helpful. and then you can restore settings. So everything for the actual management of this device is done right here. Here you can set alerts. So you can enable or disable SMS alerts, and obviously you kind of want this on so that you know when you've exceeded your data, etc. So I went ahead and enabled this. And then let's get into mobile. This basically defines how the device is connected. So I'm basically always going to automatically connect other than when I'm roaming. This device isn't going to roam. It's an emergency failover so that all critical services in the house can be maintained should my cable provider go down for a bit. So I'm going to leave it as a default. SIM security, you can activate security on the SIM card. And here you have all the internal details of the SIM card. Under advanced, we have the default IP, which you can obviously change, and probably would recommend you do so depending on what type of network and configuration you're working on. You're going to want to leave most of everything else alone. However, if you do change your IP address, you need to change your range of DHCP IPs. So your VPN is going to be, your pass-through is going to be on, your DHCP server is going to be on. That's so basically any device, including your firewall, can just plug in, get a DHCP address, and just work. And that's kind of what you want. We're going to disable DMZ and disable diagnostics. So you're going to leave all that pretty much the same. Here you can actually do port forwarding just like any other router, but I've got that disabled because, again, I'm using this as a modem. And same with port filtering. I don't have any of that defined. And that's really all there is to the actual setup of the device. There's really not that much to it. So now the next step is now that it's configured, active. One thing I wanted to mention, make sure that when you first set this up, you plug it directly into a laptop and that you make sure that SIM is activated. It took me a few phone calls to get the SIM active, and once I got it activated, then everything was fine. But until that SIM is active, you're not going to get very far with your configuration. So make sure that the SIM is active and you can communicate, through a laptop, directly as a modem connection. And once you got established a connection and you know everything's okay, then you can now go ahead and double check your setups and then get ready to actually port it onto your router. Okay, so now let's get on to the router configuration. Okay, so now that we've set up the 4G LTE modem, we're now ready to plug it in and create what's called a failover connection. And we're going to do that in the interfaces. And this, of course, assumes you have an extra Ethernet port in your device. So I went ahead and launched the configuration page, which most of you have probably already seen already. And the first thing we're going to do is go over to where it says network. And there you have a list of all your LANs, VLANs, and so on and so forth. And down here you can see that there is a port 5, which is basically nothing attached to it. So I went ahead and plugged in the LTE modem, and now we're going to configure that as a WAN connection. Because the very first thing we got to do is set up a WAN connection, and then from there we can set up the failover in the Sophos configuration. So let's do that first. So the first thing it's asking me to do is pick the zone. The port's already selected, so I'm going to go ahead and click on WAN, and I'm going to hit on DHCP because I want to go ahead and let it read the modem directly. The only other thing I have to really do here is give it a name. So we'll get creative and call it failover. And from here, we're just going to hit save. It's going to give me the warning that we're updating interfaces. I'm going to click OK. And after a couple seconds, you see that it's been now set up as a physical WAN. It's DHCP. Still hasn't read an IP address yet, but it will. It takes a few minutes to actually read it. So now that this is configured, we've actually assigned that extra NIC card with the LTE modem that we created and set up, plug that directly into that Ethernet port, and define this as a WAN port. So now the next thing we want to do is go over to the link manager. And when you go to the link manager, the first thing you're going to see is it's now listed. So the failover connection that we just created now shows up as a gateway. So now our task is to define which gateway is the primary, which gateway is the backup, and give it some rules. So first things first, we'll just look at the configuration here. So this is already set up as a active, so this makes it the primary. So we'll leave this alone. And the failover, we're going to actually create that as the backup. So we're going to say, give me a backup. And now we've got to set a little bit of rules. So it's asking me, when do I activate this gateway? Well, I can leave it on manual, but that means I'm going to have to go in there and turn it on myself, and that's not really what I want to do. If this thing, is needed, if my cable modem goes out, I need it to kick in by itself. I don't need to be turning it on. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click this one. So on any active gateway fails, so anytime an active gateway fails, which I only have one other, this is going to kick in. Here it's talking about inheriting the weight, and it's mostly used in a dual connection system where you want to maybe give the faster connection more priority. So for this purpose, we're not using it. So I'm going to leave it alone. What I am going to change though is the action on fallback. So when my cable modem gets restored, what does it want me to do? I can serve up all new connections through the restored gateway, or I can reroute and just stop and serve all connections through the restored gateway, not just the new ones. So I want this one because I don't want to be running on a cell modem for any longer than I have to. So once it kicks in, it needs to shift back over to the primary once the primary cable modem comes back up. And that's all I have to do. So I'm going to hit save, click OK, and it saved the rule. So now you can see that on the front page here it says that my main is active. It happens to be disconnected right now, that's why it's red, but it's the primary, and it shows the new failover, which is the 4G LTE modem, is the backup when any active gateway goes out. So I basically have configured a failover. It was pretty much that simple. So now we're going to go ahead and test it. But there's one other thing that you need to double check on, because you may or may not want to tune these. So I'm going to go over to the firewall real quick. And I'm going to pick my default rule. And down at the bottom, you have a choice. So here you have a choice of using the WAN link feature, which we just set up, or I can specify one of the gateways. Now, why would I want to do this? Or why wouldn't I want to do this? And there's a really good reason for it, because what you really want if you're in a failover condition is you want the router to manage itself. So when the primary modem goes out, you want it to switch over to the backup. When the connections are restored, you want it to come back. I'm assuming that's the use case. It's the use case that I'm describing right here. So if I have a rule that doesn't use the WAN link, it's not going to fail over. So what that means is if I picked my main gateway as the only choice and no backup, it's not gonna, that whole firewall rule is gonna stop. Now, I'm not gonna want to do this here, so I'm gonna leave it at the WAN load tolerance. However, there are rules For example, media streamers or you know, Plex servers or anything that you've set up that's maybe high bandwidth that you do not want to route to a backup router, you can pre-configure that rule to use only your primary gateway. And once that's configured, it's locked into that rule. So anything that uses that rule, you know, will not go back on if there's a failover. So it's an important distinction, because by default, almost everything is set to the WAN link load balance. So just to clarify, let's go back over here real quick. This is the rules that will define what happens. So for example, my primary goes out, the secondary will kick in. If the firewall rule is set to use it, and let's pick one. Let's do streaming here. So under streaming, if I choose this and set it to my main and set no backup, when I save this, that rule is locked into the primary gateway. Now, if anything happens to the primary gateway, that rule will block all the traffic that's under that rule. So I hope that makes sense, because it's a critical distinction. And the main reason you even care about this is if you're using a cellular backup for some sorts, or a pay-as-you-go type of an approach where you're restricted to the amount of bandwidth you have for, just like in my case, just emergencies, then you don't want to have high bandwidth rules just going down and hammering your LTE connection. So you want to be basically a little bit cautious. So you just have to understand how that works. So I hope that makes sense. So now you might want to go through all your rules, make sure they're configured the way you want, make sure they're either set up to the WAN link manager or that they are configured to the primary, or in some cases the secondary. You know, if you have something that you don't care about bandwidth and you want to offload some of this traffic, you can do that too. The nice thing about Sophos is you can configure it every which way but loose. So I can have certain rules use one connection, certain rules use another connection, and certain rules have an auto backup. So I can pretty much configure that any way I want. Okay, so now that we've gone through and configured it, that's really all we have to do. So my primary rule here, which what we set earlier, my default rule, is set to use the WAN link load balancer. So we're going to go ahead and test this out. Okay, now I have everything plugged in, and now as you can now see both gateways are now active. One's been set up, as we discussed before, as active, one's been set up as backup. So now let's actually test this out and see how it truly works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and I'm going to run a speed test. And we can see that this is actually my primary connection, since I don't get anywhere near that on the LTE modem. So what I'm going to do is we'll finish the test. Okay, so there's our results. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over and I'm going to unplug the primary connection. So just going to power it down, which I just did. And now we're going to see when I try to rerun the speed test, it's going to time out for a little bit, because remember there's a 60-second failover time. So it's going to try and reconnect for the first 60 seconds, and then it's going to say, I'm done, I'm failing over. So let's wait a few minutes, or a minute or two, and we'll see that we now, because we're not able to connect anything right now, since the primary is unplugged, we should now shortly see the ability to connect to the secondary, and it's extremely slow. Okay, so the failover's kicked in, and it should now run the speed test. Now it bombs on the speed test half the time because where I have the modem right now is a really bad connection. So I'm going to have to actually put an antenna in the attic to make this work right and give me enough bandwidth. But we can now see at least it's connected. Okay, there we go. So we can now see the secondary backup has kicked in, and we're now able to connect. And again, this is don't get discouraged by the speed. I live in an area that's extremely bad reception, so positioning, antenna type, all that stuff's going to make a big difference when I attach external antennas to this particular device. But the bottom line is it's working, it's connected, it failed over. Now I'm going to go back the other way. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the primary back on, and let's see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to leave it on this page here for a second. Again, it takes 60 seconds to knock out the secondary and re-enable the primary. So it should be almost done. And there we go. All I did was plug it back in. It took over and said, okay, I'm back. And it's now running full speed ahead. So that's pretty much all there is to it. Sophos gives you quite a bit of configuration options in how you handle gateways. You can even, as I mentioned earlier, have multiple internet providers in your house and separate the load accordingly. A little bit extreme, but you can do it. So anyway, that's about it for this video. I hope you found it useful. You will probably need to check your own independent, your own particular router and see if it supports failover to see if you can make use of something like this. I know pfSense and Untangle and SonicWall, they all have the ability to create a failover connection, and some of the commercial routers as well. So just take a look at the features of your router and see if you have that option, and if you do and you're concerned about things like I am, then you can set something up like this. And just to clarify, in case anybody's wondering why I'm going through all this, my alarm system, phone systems, everything go through my internet connection. So when that goes out, we lose phone communication, we lose through Verizon, we lose our alarm, and then obviously everything else, but the critical ones are the phones and the alarms. So having this failover just gives me that peace of mind that if I lose connection, if the service goes down, that I at least have a backup on it, so in the event of an alarm, a burglar alarm or fire alarm, the call will go through, or the alarm will trip and go through. And that's really what I'm after. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. And again, if you haven't subscribed, please do so and click that notifications icon. And I'll see you on the next video.